Cambridge in the autumn always felt like a promise. The crisp air, the scent of old books mixing with fallen leaves, the hushed grandeur of ancient halls. It was everything I'd romanticized about academia. I was 28, a graduate student at a prestigious university, and my life revolved around my thesis, a play I was meticulously crafting. It explored modern masculinity, its intricate layers, its contradictions, the quiet struggles men faced in a world constantly shifting beneath their feet. I poured everything into it, every observation, every hidden vulnerability I saw in myself and others. I was brilliant, people said, but cripplingly introverted, lost in my own head more often than not. The play was my way of speaking, a voice I was still learning to use. That's where Dr. Eleanor Vance came in. She was my advisor, a name whispered with reverence and a little fear in the English department. Charismatic, sharp as a whip, and fiercely ambitious, she was everything I wasn't outwardly. Yet, there was an instant connection, an electric current that hummed between us. She saw the potential in my raw, unpolished ideas, the nerve of my chosen subject. Our initial meetings were purely academic, but they quickly evolved. Late nights in her office, fueled by strong coffee, discussing Aristotle and Albee, then veering into the personal, the philosophical. Her eyes, intelligent and warm, seemed to see right through my anxieties, past the imposter syndrome that often choked me. I fell for her, slowly, irrevocably, first as a mentor, then as something much deeper. She became my confidant, my muse, my lover. It felt illicit, thrilling, dangerous, and utterly necessary. We were two minds, two souls, intertwined in the intense, insular world of graduate studies. She understood the weight of my ambition, the terror of putting my most vulnerable thoughts onto paper. We spent hours in deep conversation, brainstorming, dissecting scenes, debating philosophical points. I found myself instinctively reaching for my voice recorder, a small, discreet device I used to capture snippets of inspiration, turns of phrase, or profound insights from my surroundings. In our sessions, it felt natural, a collaborative tool. I'd place it on her desk, sometimes on a stack of books, recording our intense dialogues, our shared moments of creative brilliance. It felt like we were building something together, a shared intellectual and emotional landscape where my play was the central monument. I trusted her with my art, my heart, my every secret fear, believing she was as invested in my success as I was. It was a trust that felt as solid as the ancient stone walls surrounding us. The air in Eleanor's office was always charged, thick with the scent of her expensive perfume and the faint metallic tang of ambition. Our relationship, once a thrilling secret, had settled into a kind of quiet understanding. I saw her less as my advisor and more as my intellectual partner, my anchor. She was the only person I truly opened up to about the gnawing insecurities that plagued me, the imposter syndrome that whispered I didn't belong here, that my play was a fraud. My script dealt with themes of vulnerability and hidden trauma in men, exploring the often destructive societal pressures to conform to rigid ideas of masculinity. It was controversial, I knew, and that made me anxious. Eleanor, however, seemed to revel in the edge. She encouraged me to dig deeper, to lay bare my own fears, telling me it was the only way to achieve true authenticity in my work. I recorded almost all our private discussions then, not just the brainstorming, but the moments where I faltered, where I confessed my deepest anxieties about the play's reception, about whether I was good enough, whether I was simply projecting my own struggles onto my characters. I'd talk about my father, the pressure to always be strong, the fear of appearing weak. Eleanor would listen, her gaze unwavering, occasionally interjecting with a question that seemed to cut right to the core of my uncertainty, making me articulate the very things I barely dared to think. Those recordings became a repository of my rawest self, a creative journal of sorts, documenting the evolution of my play and, inherently, the evolution of me. I remember one evening, she had a small, sleek flash drive sitting on her desk, right next to where my recorder usually sat. It was barely noticeable, just another piece of tech. I didn't think twice about it, assuming it was for transferring files or something equally innocuous. It just blended into the backdrop of our shared creative space, another item on the cluttered desk of an academic. We'd laugh, share a glass of wine, then dive back into the intricate web of my play, its characters, its challenging themes. She made me feel seen, truly seen, for the first time in my life, and that feeling was intoxicating. I believe she was not just my advocate, but a co-conspirator in my artistic revolution. The news hit me like a jolt of pure adrenaline. My play, The Unspoken Weight, had been accepted into a major festival. A major festival. It wasn't just a local production. This was an opportunity, a validation I hadn't dared to dream of. I remember running through the autumn streets, the crisp air biting at my cheeks, my heart hammering with a joy so intense it felt physical. I called Eleanor first, of course. Her voice on the phone was warm, congratulatory, full of pride. She said she always knew I had it in me, that my voice was too important to be ignored. We celebrated that night, a quiet dinner, just the two of us, raising a toast to the future, to my burgeoning career. She spoke of how this was just the beginning, how my unique perspective on masculinity would resonate, would challenge, would finally find its audience. I felt like I was on top of the world, suspended in a perfect moment of hope and achievement. Then, the email came, not from Eleanor, but from a former colleague of hers, a casual forward of a new academic paper circulating in the department. The title was innocuous enough, Deconstructing Toxic Masculinity in Emerging Playwrights, a contemporary critique. I opened it, curious, my chest still buzzing from the festival news. As I scrolled, my initial curiosity curdled into confusion, then a cold dread. The language felt familiar. The arguments, the specific turns of phrase, the almost clinical dissection of problematic artistic choices and unrefined perspectives, it felt like a distorted echo of my own inner dialogue. And then, the excerpts. Verbatim. My words. My most vulnerable confessions about imposter syndrome, my struggles with my father's expectations, my anxieties about whether my play was too aggressive or too raw, in its portrayal of male anger and sadness. They were all there, stripped of context, twisted, and recontextualized as evidence of the very toxic masculinity I was attempting to critique and understand in my play. The paper was anonymously sourced, claiming its insights came from confidential dialogues with burgeoning artists. It accused these anonymous playwrights of perpetuating the very systems they claimed to dismantle, using their personal insecurities as proof of their inherent flaws. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. A specific passage, almost word for word, detailed my private struggle with the line between portraying vulnerability and appearing weak, but in Eleanor's paper, it became proof of a deeply ingrained patriarchal defensiveness. The realization hit me like a physical blow. That flash drive on her desk, the one I'd dismissed as insignificant, the hours of collaborative recordings. Eleanor hadn't just used my words, she had weaponized them. She hadn't just stolen my ideas. She had claimed them as her own initial insights in the paper's introduction, presenting my core concepts as her foundational thoughts, subtly weaving them into the fabric of her groundbreaking critique. The festival acceptance, the celebration, the hope, it all shattered into a million sharp pieces around me. The fallout was swift and brutal. Within days, the university's dean of arts reached out, not with congratulations, but with a sterile, formal email. Due to unforeseen ethical concerns arising from a recent, widely circulated academic critique, funding for my play's festival production was being withdrawn. An ethics review was initiated, not against Eleanor, but against me. My academic reputation, the one I'd painstakingly built, was in tatters. My artistic future, once so bright, now felt like a dark, echoing void. Whispers followed me down the corridors, judgmental glances from professors and classmates who had once admired my work. They didn't see a victim. They saw the problematic playwright from Eleanor's paper, a walking embodiment of toxic masculinity, proof that my play was fundamentally flawed, a self-serving exploration rather than a genuine critique. I tried to confront Eleanor. I remember standing outside her office, the door a foreboding barrier, my hands shaking so violently I could barely knock. When she finally opened it, her expression was cool, detached, utterly devoid of the warmth I had once cherished. I stammered, holding up a printout of her paper, demanding to know how she could do this. She simply looked at me, a flicker of something I couldn't quite decipher in her eyes. Triumph? Pity? Then her voice, clinical and sharp, cut through the air. She said something about academic freedom, about the difficult choices sometimes required for intellectual rigor, about how my feelings shouldn't cloud the facts. She implied I was overreacting, that the paper was a necessary academic discourse, and that perhaps my emotional response proved its very point. Her words twisted the knife even deeper. I walked away from that office a ghost, the weight of her betrayal pressing down on me, crushing me. She hadn't just stolen my ideas. She had stolen my identity, my voice, and systematically dismantled everything I thought I was. The beautiful future I'd envisioned had vanished, replaced by a bleak landscape of shame and despair. I withdrew, completely. The campus, once a sanctuary of intellect and possibility, became a suffocating reminder of my humiliation. The hushed grandeur now felt like a mocking silence, the scent of old books like the dust of forgotten dreams. I stopped attending classes, stopped responding to emails. The world outside my small, cluttered apartment blurred into an indistinct hum. My play, once a beacon of my aspirations, lay dormant on my laptop, a monument to a trust that had been violated beyond repair. The ethics review loomed, an inevitable guillotine for my academic career. I was paralyzed by the despair, unable to articulate the depth of the betrayal, unable to fight back. What good would it do? Who would believe me, an introverted graduate student, over a tenured, celebrated professor? My confidence was shattered, my voice silenced by the very person who had once championed it. Then, a flicker, a message on an old social media platform, buried under months of unopened notifications. It was from Mark, a former classmate from a seminar 2 years prior. We hadn't been close, just friendly acquaintances. His message was brief, almost hesitant. He'd read Eleanor's paper, and something in it had bothered him. Alex, it read, I know this might sound crazy, but some of those turns of phrase, the way they discussed male vulnerability, it sounded so much like you. Like your voice. I remember you talking about some of those concepts in class. His words were a tiny spark in the suffocating darkness. My unique phrasing. My voice. He remembered. The idea that someone, anyone, had recognized my intellectual DNA in that scathing critique was like a lifeline, thin but strong. It spurred me, slowly, painfully, into action. I dragged myself out of bed, the familiar ache of despair still a heavy companion. I opened my laptop, navigating to the folders where I'd saved all my research, my drafts, my personal reflections for the play. And then, the recordings. The dozens of audio files, time-stamped, meticulously organized. Our private discussions, the brainstorming sessions, my raw confessions of doubt and fear, all captured in the clear, undeniable audio. I listened to them, a knot tightening in my stomach as Eleanor's voice, once so comforting, now sounded chillingly manipulative. Then, a specific file. The one from that evening, the flash drive on her desk. I remember our conversation, my voice filled with anxieties about the play's overt emotionality, Eleanor's subtle prompts, her agreement, her assurance that vulnerability was strength. And then, a faint, almost imperceptible click in the background. My own recorder picked it up. A second recorder. Hers. The disguised flash drive. A cold wave of clarity washed over me, replacing despair with a searing, righteous anger. I had proof. Undeniable, tangible proof. The process of compiling the evidence was grueling, an emotional excavation that forced me to relive every moment of the betrayal. Each replayed recording, each highlighted passage in my drafts that mirrored Eleanor's published work was a fresh wound. But with each piece of evidence I gathered, a new kind of strength bloomed within me, fueled by a fierce determination to reclaim what was mine. Mark became an unexpected ally, sitting with me for hours, helping me cross-reference, offering moral support, his quiet belief in me a steadying force. We approached the university's student union first. They were initially cautious, but when I played the recordings, their expressions shifted from skepticism to shock. The legal aid office attached to the university took up my case, recognizing the gravity of intellectual property theft and abuse of power. Filing the formal complaint felt like screaming into the wind, but this time, I wasn't screaming alone. The university administration, Confronted with undeniable audio proof of Eleanor's plagiarism and the explicit recontextualization of my private confessions, had no choice but to act. The ethics review against me was dropped, and a new one was swiftly opened against Eleanor. The evidence was overwhelming. My original drafts predating her paper, my recorded intellectual process, and the chilling presence of her own discreet recorder capturing my most vulnerable thoughts. The scandal erupted quietly within the hallowed halls, then flared into a public embarrassment for the institution. Eleanor, once a revered figure, was stripped of her tenure, forced to resign in disgrace, her reputation crumbling under the weight of her deceit. It was a hollow victory in some ways. The triumph was there, but it was overshadowed by the trauma, the slow, bitter realization that this person I had loved and trusted had used me so ruthlessly. The taste of victory was metallic, tainted by the memory of her betrayal. The university, perhaps as a form of damage control, reinstated funding for my play, though the delay meant missing that major festival. The journey to production was long, arduous, and fraught with lingering anxieties. Every note, every direction, every interaction felt tinged with the ghost of Eleanor's betrayal. But I persevered. The play, The Unspoken Weight, finally premiered a year later, not in the fanfare of a festival, but in a smaller, more intimate venue. And it was met with critical acclaim. Reviewers spoke of its raw honesty, its unflinching exploration of male vulnerability, its powerful voice. Standing backstage after opening night, listening to the applause, a strange mix of relief and melancholy washed over me. I had reclaimed my work, but the scars of the experience were deep, an indelible part of my story now. The pain of Eleanor's betrayal had been immense, almost unbearable, but in its wake, something unexpected emerged, a new purpose. I began speaking out, cautiously at first, then with growing confidence, about academic integrity and the urgent need for mental health support for graduate students. My story resonated. I shared my recordings, not to shame Eleanor further, but to illustrate the insidious nature of power dynamics and intellectual exploitation. I became an advocate, transforming my deepest wounds into a narrative that could help others navigate the treacherous currents of academia. I found my true voice, not just as a playwright telling stories on stage, but as a person, using my lived experience to shed light on difficult truths. My plays now carry an even deeper layer of empathy, informed by my own journey through darkness and back. The past still hurts, a dull ache that reminds me of what I lost, but it no longer defines me. It forged me. I learned that my true strength wasn't in my intellect alone, but in my resilience, my ability to turn devastation into a platform for change. It was a bittersweet victory, a hard-won peace, but a peace I wouldn't trade for anything.